Sir, we have got a large number of questions, but I'm confining only to five questions. And again, I'm grouping these questions speaker wise. So I'll put three questions together to first to start with Professor Krishnakumar, and then two questions together to Professor Bihar, and one question to Professor Shyam Menon.
चलिए
Uh,
चलिए प्लीज गो अहेड
Sir, I would like to first start with by mentioning that this webinar has evoked a lot of response across the country. More than 800 persons have logged in to this webinar. Sir, there are three questions which are addressed to Professor Krishnakumar. The first one is, what is the purpose of national exams in class 3, class 5, and class 8? Would it not put pressure on students at young age? The second question to Professor Krishnakumar is that NEP 20 has merged various groups under one category of SEDGs, SEDGs, which constitute majority population of students. What will be its implication of merging the categories at school level? And the third question is, sir, does not Shah Rukh Khan saying school ke baad baiju raise a big question mark on our current Indian education system? Does this kind of advertisement show the real image of current education system in India? Will the new education policy change this perspective of our education system where everyone needs tuition classes after school? Professor Krishnakumar, please. These questions are addressed to you.
Thank you. My answer to the first question is that yes, reintroduction of an examination-based evaluation system in the elementary classes at these 2 or 3 points will certainly increase stress on children. As it is, we are proposing starting off their education from such a tender age of 3. And given the realities of our early childhood provisions right now, the stress on children, which is already very high across the system, can only increase with introduction of exams, something which the Right to Education Act had prohibited. Now, the result of this stressful situation is that a tuition system, a parallel coaching system has taken place across the system, right from early childhood up to the highest stage of school education. We notice that across the country, a coaching tuition system has virtually become a parallel system. And in many cases, it undermines the main school system. It seems that given the realities of how this restructuring will unfold, the coaching and the tuition system is not likely to diminish at all. In fact, it may flourish. There is no consideration at the moment as to how we will increase quality in early childhood education. At the moment, we don't have even norms for it, and they can't be created out of the sky. The entire issue of focusing on this parallel system has been in fact ignored, and one can read the document thinking that our system actually doesn't have such a parallel system, which has seriously undermined the purposes of education by making it so important for every child to take coaching or tuition at some stage or the other. In fact, our IITs and our medical colleges, they're all now admitting students who have been heavily coached. It's not a competition among the most potential engineers and doctors among children. Rather, it's a competition among how much expenditure has been made by parents for coaching their children for these entrance tests. So in that sense, the system has been undermined and is likely to remain like that. And this particular malaise can only increase as years come by. The second question I couldn't quite hear. If you may kindly repeat it once.
The second question is that NEP 20 has merged various groups under one category of SEDG, which constitute majority population of students. What will be implication of this merging of categories at school level?
Yes. When it comes to recognizing the specific categories that the government system has worked with so far, it's unfortunate that this document doesn't recognize those categories, whether it's the scheduled castes or the scheduled tribes or the minorities or other forms of social disadvantage, including the other backward classes and so on. The lumping together of all these very sociologically entrenched and well-recognized categories into a broader, generalized kind of title is certainly problematic. And one doesn't know exactly what's the purpose of that lumping, when in fact we know that it's a matter of pride for our country that our policies of positive discrimination have worked despite all obstacles, and across the world they are appreciated. The extent to which the goals of equity have been served by a policy of reservation and special treatment of different groups and recognition of these different groups, the extent to which these policies have been pursued over the years has been a matter of some appreciation, or even though there are numerous causes of dissatisfaction, but the general direction has been appreciated. What's the point of now lumping these categories and forgetting them as if they don't exist, as if India doesn't have a caste-divided society, as if we don't have problems of disadvantage over generations, as if our tribal children have the same starting point as anybody else. It's a kind of an act of pretension. And unfortunately, the document does have many such acts of pretension, kind of wishing away a reality by not noticing it and creating a sort of a fantasy of all problems getting resolved. This speaks of a very imaginative kind of instrumentality, which is certainly problematic if you are looking for good insights and practical solutions. Thank you.
The next set of questions is to Professor Anurag Bihar. The new policy, how much it would be effective in the globalized world? It lays a lot of emphasis on education in local language, whereas English is becoming an important mode of conversation in this world. The second question is, why the final document of NEP is so different from the draft submitted in 2019? And the third question, this third question has been asked by a very senior IAS officer, Mr. Dev Sahayam. He says that this policy is predatory policy with the center violating the constitution and federal structure of India. How can the center arbitrarily grab school education from the states and dictate terms? School education must return to the states list as it was before 1976. Professor Anurag Bihar.
Thank you. So how does this policy respond to the increased globalization, increased integration of the globe and things?
Yes.
Well, and I think that question's focus was particularly on the matter of education, and that to English. So I think the policy just bases itself on the well understood, the well recorded, with overbearing evidence that children learn better in their own language. And therefore, the policy recommends that the medium of instruction should be their own language. Now, at the same time, it is equally emphatic that children learn multiple languages well. and much better at a younger age. So the policy is, while focusing on the matter that let's make the mother tongue, the local language, the home language as the medium of instruction, but at the same time, through multiple measures, is encouraging the idea of multilingualism. And within that multilingualism, it's of course Indian languages, but certainly there is English. So I don't think the policy in any way is disbalancing the fundamental educational issue that the mother tongue is a better medium of instruction versus perhaps these aspirations and the economic needs of learning other languages, including English. The second question was to do with why is the 66-page policy very different from the 484-page policy?
Yes.
Now, that's a question I will find it very hard to answer, because I was involved in writing the 484-page policy. I was not involved in cutting down the 484 pages into the 66 pages. But I can speculate. One part of the speculation is that just in the sheer mechanics of summarizing 484 pages into 66 pages, a lot of it is lost. And what you lose, some of it might just be happenstance, some of it might be purposive, I don't know. So I think some of the differences are because of that. Some of the differences are because perhaps at the policy level, when the final policy was decided upon, the government of India did want to take a few different stances from what is there in the draft national education policy. But I must say that yes, there are differences. Yes, there are some noticeable differences, but it's not as dramatic as the questions seem to suggest. But let me remind you, I'm just speculating here because I was not involved in cutting down the 484 pages to 66 pages. The third is that, is the union government predatory, and is it taking over the state's rights and responsibilities of school education? Well, perhaps that trend goes back a long way if that's happening. However, I must say that if one reads the policy carefully, on the school education side, it is making suggestions. If you read the text, that's what it's doing. It is making suggestions. It is in no way suggesting that the government of India is actually deciding that that's exactly the way it will be. Now, when the Kothari Commission recommendations were implemented, the situation was pretty much the same. How are you going to have a nationally coherent set of principles, if not exactly the same system, at the same time leaving to the state, or why just the state, to the school what is due to the state and the school? So we've been through this before. I don't read this policy as being particularly predatory on the rights of the states. Thank you.
The next question is to Professor Menon. The question asker is a very important person, Dr. Ramesh Deka, who was director of All India Institute of Medical Sciences. His question is, how to internationalize higher education in India?
Well, this is not about the policy, surely. I think if it's about the policy, one should ask the people who wrote the policy.
No, it's not relating to policy. It is a general question.
The global excellence and globally accepted standards and so on is often, is often understood. And it's not just about this policy, but for several years, maybe for some 10, 15 years in India, this discourse of what is of international standards and global standards world standards, all these used to be set. And I really feel that a globally excellent institution has to be, first of all, locally relevant. So only when it has an organic rooting on firm rooting on a particular stratum and is responding to that stratum in an organic manner, then can it rise itself to the level of a globally excellent institution. So international standards is largely in that sense. I wouldn't be really, think in terms of just collaborations and, faculty exchanges and twinning programs and stuff like that alone. That doesn't really create much of an international standards. Neither will inviting world players in foreign universities to come and set up shops here. Is not going to help. I think we need to really work in terms of creating excellent faculty. And if institutions have to be developed, there has to be good faculty. And we have to think of a serious program of creating excellence in our prospective faculty, attracting young, bright people to come into academia. A lot of attitudinal, the whole environmental ethos has to change for that. At the moment, it's a very unhappy situation. I hope it doesn't last for long. But at least in public universities, it's an environment of feeling oppressed and fearful. And I don't think those are the places where good research will happen. And those are the places where innovation of ideas will happen. All this will happen only if there is a certain liberality in the way in which universities, the ecosystem of universities is located. And only then will we rise to the international standards. It's not just a Lego toy approach of creating standard templates in various parts of the country and with linkages with institutions abroad, and suddenly it becomes international. I don't think it happens like that.
Kailash, you can proceed to. Are you going to deliver your vote of thanks?
Sir, now we come to the end of the program. On behalf of India International Center, I would like to profusely thank Professor Raj Bihari, Dr. Krishnakumar, Professor Shyam Menon for sparing their time for this webinar. And as I had mentioned earlier, this webinar has really aroused a lot of interest, and the number of participants who have joined this webinar indicates that. And I'm sure today's deliberations are definitely going to be much more helpful in understanding this new policy. So with these words, I once again thank each one of you profusely on behalf of IISc, and I look forward for your more and more participation in IISc webinars and physical programs in future. And in the end, I also like to thank our President, Sri N. Vora, who was kind enough to spare his time for chairing this entire session. Thank you very much, sir. And I thank everybody who has joined this webinar through the virtual mode. Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.